this committee has some pretty heavy-duty tasks going forward. I had hoped this would kind of be a meet and greet. It spun off an email I sent to Monica a few weeks ago. A very simple question: what does management have in mind in regard to the renewal? Of course, we're all principally interested in the rent structure, but I know there are folks on the committee who are interested in other components of the agreement. So without getting into a big megillah, I know Mark would like to give us a little history on the agreement, and so maybe we can just get going. Monica, you want to add anything?
No, I'm good. That's good.
All right.
Thank you all for being here today, really.
And please speak up, and we are videotaping the meeting for reference, and it is recorded. All right, sir.
All right. I'll pull this down temporarily so everyone can hear me a little more clearly. You know, I got involved back in 1987, but of course, you know, my father and his company were involved before that, and I had a pretty good feeling for what went on in 1979, 80, 81, 82, and all those years. And I had to, in order to address the issues that came up when I got involved. First, you have to understand the initial lease, or the lease that ended up being the unified lease, the unity lease, was a totally different lease than exists today. It was a gross lease, and what that meant was that whatever was charged, the operating expenses, salaries, and all that came out of the pot. It was not charged to the residents. It was, you paid a flat amount, and it was the operational expenses were the responsibility of the landlord, and that was a very unique difference. It created an issue. One, any monies not spent would inure to the landlord. Any money spent would inure to the benefit of the community, and it created a sort of a conflict of interest between the two sides. I had many a discussion with Arthur Bernhardt, who was president of UCO for a while, for a long time, and he would be hat in hand asking for things or demanding them, and I would be saying, well, I can't do this, but I can, and there was a minimum amount that had to be spent, and we were always over that amount. That was prior. That was the '87 year. The settlement agreement that was entered into before my time had those 50-cent increases. And then there was a $10 bump in 1990. Prior to that $10 bump, we came to the then committee and said we'd like to do, it wasn't a quid pro quo, but we'd like to do an upgrade of the facilities. At that time, the theater in there was a flat theater with folding chairs. So we built a sloped theater. We did a bunch of other things. We put in new carpeting. We put in new, so we spent a serious amount of money. When I say we, the company, at that time. And then, and also, I'm trying to remember if Hastings was part of the 2000 or the 1990s. 2000. Okay. Then the rent was set forth through the 1990s, and as we started closing out the 1990s, we entered into a negotiation for the renewal at that time for 10 years. I was of the opinion that there would be no way, you got 309 separate associations, to have a vote that would approve a new agreement. I was assured that UCO could accomplish that, and to my surprise, they did. They were very, very effective in getting everybody signed on to the Millennium Agreement. The Millennium Agreement, which you see here, not perfect. I didn't write it. Glickman did for Peter Sachs's office. He wasn't our attorney. Our attorney was Manny Garcia, who's now retired. We decided that the only way to resolve the difference in, we did a pure CPI and came up with a number that was unacceptable to Utah. And I said, look, we only care about the net amount we're getting. And, you know, rather than, so the decision was, why make this always a fight, an argument, a conflict of interest on how the money is spent? You decide how the money is spent. It's your decision. If we split it into an operating pool and a base rent pool. Base rent will be fixed. It'll be a agreed upon amount. And the operating rent will be adjusted as you decide. You want to reduce it? You reduce it. You want to increase it? You increase it. And based upon that, when we ended up agreeing that for a certain period of years, that $2,700,000 and whatever is in here would be put into a separate operating account, the money for which you couldn't spend without the approval on the budget, whatever, plus all the other income, which was ticket sales and everything else, $300,000 to $400,000 at that time, if I remember. And that money was the committee's decision to, we make recommendations, we bring bids, we bring contracts, but ultimately approve, this is how much we're going to spend. No, we're not going to fix this now, we're going to do that. This is more important, whatever. And that changed the dynamic, and I think in a positive way in many ways, in that it was no longer a zero-sum amount, where whatever I keep benefits me and whatever you keep benefits you. That, and the agreement was for 21 years. And we worked out a rental structure, and believe me, if I could explain to you all the discussions that went into what it is, it was a negotiation. And it was based upon the expectation of what we thought inflation would be, where costs would be going, et cetera, et cetera. At that time, the amount that Benenson got was a fixed, flat, triple net amount. And they didn't care as long as their money, which was a priority lien, was secure. So, you know, as long as they got their fixed amount, their fixed rent, what was it, $219,000 a month about, they didn't, you know, they were like, okay, whatever you negotiate about that, that's up to you, but we want to make sure we get ours and it's secure. I mean, they cared that the community was properly maintained, they cared, you know, all the things that a good landlord would want, and we had to present to them for approval any kind of, you know, extraordinary kind of things and so forth and so on. And we had to insure them, make sure they were insured, and so on. Coming up on 2021, our agreement with Benenson is December 31st. The agreement that was entered into in January of 1982 came up for expiration. They are a major real estate company, privately owned, operating out of all over the country, and they have properties here. You can look on their website. And we're this big compared to their Empire State Building. You know, just to give you an idea of size and structure. They specifically don't want to get involved in the operations, the day-to-day operations, but they made it very clear that starting in 2022, that the rental structure was going to be way in their favor and far less so in our favor. I could have said, forget it, you keep it, you run it. They would have found somebody to do it, and whether you liked it or whether you liked them or not, that's what would have been done. But we negotiated an arrangement, and my point was something's better than nothing, and I'd rather continue to get some revenue and whatever, and we reached an agreement with them that goes for another 10 years after December 31st, 2020. So they don't want to be the ones on the front line, but everything discussed, ultimately, it's it's going to inure to their benefit and their partners and their investors. So that's the history, and I would be happy to answer any questions anybody has, any confusion, etc. The solution, if we can't reach an agreement, and when I say, if an agreement isn't reachable, either whether it's Benenson or whether it's you or whether it's us, I doubt it'll be us, is that it goes to our binding arbitration. And the arbitration binds all the parties. And there's a set of criteria of what the arbitrators are supposed to look at. It's vague, in my opinion. It's not real clear, but it'll be what it'll be. I mean, if we can't reach an agreement, and if we can't get an agreement of all associations, then maybe if 60% of the associations agree and 40% don't, there's going to be an arbitration with those 40%. If they, if 10 hold out, there's going to be an arbitration with those 10. There's no, that's the way the documents are drawn. Now, I doubt many associations are going to be willing to bear the cost of an arbitration unless it's shared by a large group. So that's, so if there is an agreement of 250, I don't think the other 59 would fight it, but that's up to them and up to you. So that's my introductory explanation. Anybody who thinks I've said something or a little bit off, and I'd be happy to answer questions. Richard?
You said Benenson was getting $219K a month. Have
Right.
they given you a figure for the future, what they want?
They have not. I don't have a specific, but they obviously want the most that is achievable, as any landlord or any owner of a building, with the understanding that there's limits to how much they that they can fairly charge. I mean, there's a limitation on what can be afforded by the people who live in the community, and they don't want to put the community out of business, but they obviously, have they told me we want X? No, they haven't. They said to me, we would like you to come to us with a number that is satisfactory to us, and they went through a list of numbers that not that they would agree to, but if in the worst case scenario went to arbitration, how the split would be, and that's the best thing I can really explain. I'm not prepared to sit here and say, oh, they want an increase over the current amount of X. I don't want to go out on a limb and say that, because they haven't told me that.
At some point, we're going to need numbers. Without a new rent structure in front of us, how can we even begin to make a decision? Now, Monica made an interesting comment at the last operations committee meeting. It kind of curled my hair, what I have left of it. And she said, and I kind of can quote it because it really burned into my mind, Benenson is not interested in negotiating with you people. I like that you people part. And have delegated that authority to WPRF. All right. That's lovely. It's a nice thing for a landlord to say to their tenant. We don't want to negotiate with you. We're sloughing off that power to the property manager, essentially. And not that I'm interested in starting a big controversy, but I'd like to see that on a Benenson letterhead over a corporate executive signature. In particular, the part about we are not interested in negotiating with you people. I like that part.
Oh, think that's exactly how I said that, David.
We have it on tape.
No, I know you do, I know you do, but
You look,
I might
I'm
have
not
added
accustomed
the
to
nuance.
using you people in my conversations,
I
but
got you.
I do agree, I said that they weren't interested in the negotiation procedures because clearly they're not. They're not interested in the day-to-day operations, like Mark said,
Okay.
you know.
No, I heard it. They want to stand up there and do virtually nothing with their garden rate and bring in the money.
they might, you know, I could ask them, do you want to send representatives? I will specifically ask them that question. Okay?
But we do need numbers.
Well, I understand that,
And Mark, there may be
but
other
this was a
things.
meet and greet, and I didn't want to,
No, no,
you know, I
that's
didn't want
fine.
to, I'm not going to start throwing out numbers that I really don't have the authority to even give. Yeah.
All right, Barbara.
We would like to get started in negotiations within this committee, so we can get an idea what we think is fair to both sides,
Right.
okay? But we can't do that until we know what we're gonna be charged to pay back. Because that's gonna determine a lot of the factors that we're gonna look at to maybe have to change or adjust. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So until we get that, I don't see how anybody in here can do anything really with this agreement until we have numbers to know. Because if they turn around and say, your rent is gonna be X amount, and we're now paying for everything in here, well, guess what? We can't pay for everything in here and still give them double what they wanted. It's not gonna work that way. So I think we have to be fair on both sides.
Now, it would be nice, clearly, if we could reach an agreement without the horrors of lawyers and arbitration, which is just money down the drain. Right? It really would, but we need to see some numbers. Anyone else have some thoughts on this?
I have a question. Since you have direct contact, would they consider repairing all the deficiencies in the clubhouse instead of us having to pay for it? I mean, we're looking at an increase just to repair the air conditioning system and other things over $2 million. But we've been paying, we've been fixing, and we've been doing the best that we can at no expense to them. So
Right.
before sitting down and negotiating with giving us a number, how about they fix the buildings? How about they repair the air conditioning system, drainage pipes, roofs, whatever needs to be done? If they consider that.
This would be a modification of the agreement, but
Just for clarification purposes, are we now talking about 10 instead of 20 years? Because I find that an interesting point. I'm totally against another 20-year agreement. That's number one. And number two, the cost to you and to us is made up of certain things, and nothing is fixed in stone. One of my pet peeves in the current agreement is that there's no real definition of what a capital improvement is. And I think that has to be spelled out very carefully, because the rent could be one and the rent could be other. Basically, it looks like a triple net lease, except, I think, if I'm not mistaken, if there is a governmental requirement, it becomes the landlord's. The other thing is the split. Currently, the split is, if I'm not mistaken, if it's a capital improvement, it's either 1/3, 2/3. That makes a difference. I could be wrong, but I know if it's a capital improvement, it's still a split. In other words,
Well, let me tell you what I thought, my feeling, my recollection of capital improvements means. But what this is the parole evidence rule. For those of you who aren't lawyers and whatever, the reason there's a rule that bars evidence of what the parties intended that's not in the piece of paper on the four corners of the contract is because everyone can disagree as to what was said and done. So the contract has to speak for itself. But the intention was that we were supposed to do, as part of the 2000 Millennium Agreement, certain capital improvements. That's what they were called. We rebuilt the Hastings and turned it into, at our expense, we turned it into a gym, a health facility. We did some canals, we did some other things, we did the
Reposition seats in the theater.
yeah, we redid the theater again, or whatever, I forget what. But there were a number of things, there was a list of them. Those were the capital improvements they were referring to. The responsibility for capital improvements was supposed to be only those things were defined as capital improvements. Everything else is defined as an operating cost. That's what the old agreement said. That doesn't mean that's what the new agreement has to say. I'm just saying, well, that was the intent of the old agreement. Now, if we had ever gone to litigation, some judge would have decided what it meant and what it didn't. And to argue about it now is water. It's useless. But I will say that ongoing capital improvements are a negotiating issue. You can negotiate it. We can fixing things, spending money, whatever. I think that as long as they're satisfied with the rent structure and their return, they would be willing to look at maybe taking some costs today and deferring, and paying for things, and then maybe recouping it later. I don't know. I will ask them.
Well,
And I'll come and I will say that I have to come to them with a number. Look, when we were negotiating with them, I came to them with a number, and they basically laughed in my face. And okay, I was being a little aggressive, but eventually it came out to a number for us to be the management, far less than I had hoped for, but better than nothing. So.
well, Mark, you as an attorney know that there's a very tight definition of what a capital improvement is, and
Talking about the Internal
we-
Revenue Service
Excuse me?
definition? Talking about the Internal Revenue Service?
well, there's three. The American Institute of Certified Public Accountants.
Yeah.
The
There's no doubt what a capital improvement is. I just
But
tell you what
there
it's
is-
supposed to be in this
the
agreement.
problem I see, and I'm very frank, I see that there is a problem. I'm
Yeah, we gotta
recent to the board, but I'm a certified public accountant. I've raised issues in the past because I felt $850,000 for a new water tower is definitely a capital improvement. There's no doubt about it. Now, you say going to arbitration, that's the last resort, and you don't want to spend the money. Neither do I feel we should spend a ton of dough for a lawyer if we could resolve the issues ourselves. So I see it as two items. One is the dollars, and the other is the body of what's in there. And no one is that good that they could predict anything, but certain things just have stood out, and I'm not talking about something that's $100, $200, $500, $1,000, but normally speaking, in accounting, for any firm, big or small, when you capitalize something, it has a bottom. Anything below that, you don't play with. Anything above, you do. And I think those are the important issues, because we can fix any number, but that number could change tomorrow dramatically.
Right.
So that's what I'd like to see worked out.
When we had our first meeting with David and whatever, I said, look, if it's not a net lease, and you want to go back to a gross lease, which basically the millennium agreement basically says at the end of this lease, it goes back to the prior agreement, forget, whatever. That's one thing. If it's not a net lease, and they're going to be, and the landlord is going to have to come up with multi-million-dollar capital improvements, then it becomes, if they're paying for it, then they're going to have to say so, and they're going to decide what, when, where, and how. And this committee would then be in a position where it would be authorizing its own power, because if they're paying for it, then they have the say so, on the money. And so that's, if the committee was invested with the agreement, with the ability to make decisions as to what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. To ask somebody else to pay for something that, let's say, there's no requirement or obligation to pay for a water tower in this agreement or any other agreement. It's the water tower is for the benefit of this building, and this community, and these residents. So if you go and say, I think you should pay for the water tower, and they say, no, we're not going to pay for it. How do you get it done? It needs to be done, but how do you get it done? So that's the quandary. This lack of clarity in this agreement puts all the parties in. If there's no requirement to do a new HVAC system, if there's no requirement to do water coolers by the landlord, and it's not specified in the contract, and that's what we're going to address, then the question is who's responsible for it, and how do you get it done? So that's just something, I'm just throwing it out there. It's a good point that has to be addressed in the next agreement, is to who spends what, where, why, and what makes, and who makes a determination of what that is and when.
Well, wouldn't it be a good idea, we're talking about a long-term contract and a fair amount of money, that before we conclude this, that there's a detailed study of the property and what appears to have to be done? And
Yes.
that way you have an idea of how you're going forward?
I think that that's a very, very sound starting point. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Bob was there.
Bob.
As far as the
Bob.
the HVAC system,
The HVAC.
right, that's a part of the building. So if something needs to be done, we're renting the building, is that correct?
Yeah, he said.
Okay,
as
we're
if
renting the
they're
building.
Renting the building.
Yeah.
So-
The building's leased to every unit owner.
Right, so if we are renting the building, I mean, the owner of the building should be responsible for everything in the building.
But yeah, but that's not the agreement. If you read the definition of what is an operating expense, read it carefully. It's right in here. Each, every, all, and any expense associated with the facilities is considered an operating expense.
The triple net lease.
But
That's
the
what it
H-
says.
But the
And I-
HVAC system
I'll
is
show you the
part
paragraph.
of the building, so it should be repaired by the owner.
It's a triple net lease, Bob.
Yeah.
That's what it tells you, triple net lease. It's a definition.
That's a standard triple net lease.
Barbara.
I want to ask something, not to sound too ignorant, but this agreement is going to expire in 21, correct?
Right.
So it's gone away. So we can either change things or we can make a totally new agreement.
Yes.
Am I correct? And it's
Yes.
up to them to decide whether they'll accept what we want or they won't accept.
Right.
Not us, I'm talking about every unit owner in this place. You know, the associations. So that's how it would work.
Every association, the way I understand it is,
That's every-
has to agree to, and however each association votes, whether it's 60% approval or 70, whatever, has to approve whatever changes there are, amendments there are. to
Right,
the-
like the
to
last time, everybody had to sign.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, but if we don't come up with an agreement,
Speak up.
it reverts back
Talk louder.
to the prior agreement. It's in there.
Like we need the long-term lease.
So it reverts back to the
Go
one.
back to a gross one.
Yeah.
But
Well-
we have to come up with something.
We have to come up with
But we
something.
need to know what that number would be.
Well, we just said that before, yeah.
If we don't come up with something by 21, it reverts back to the
Yes.
long-term
Okay.
lease.
Okay, by reverting back to the old lease, is that advantageous to us or is it not? Because if it is advantageous to us, then let it revert.
Without numbers, Bob,
Yeah,
how do
do
we
nothing.
know?
Can't do nothing else.
That's the problem here. We need numbers. We need numbers from management. What is it they're looking for, right? And I'm not sure which management. The one that sits up in New York or the one that's sitting here, right?
Right.
I'm sure we would rather have the one here
Thank you.
because
Yeah, but I
It's
don't know
local,
how,
it's
how
easy
tight
to
the
get-
lease is, Bob. I don't know how tight the leash is. What influence does Benenson inflict upon local managers? You know, the agreements I read refer to Mark and Monica, the local people, as resident managers. To me, that was like the superintendent up in the New York apartment building, right?
Oh,
The
that's
toilet's blocked, Monica, fix it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know
Well, I
what
think,
your
I think,
discretion is.
well, we have a little more discretion than that. Let me just, I was looking for a definition here, and I'll find it. But anyway, I don't, it's not important. We explained to them, if we were just a property manager, they could hire, name a property management company, I don't know, which one, like, Seacrest, or,
Or Donald could manage.
yeah, there you go.
Cushman & Wakefield.
So I said, look, this is not a property. What you own, what you have a building in New York, you have a building here, you have a building there. You don't have a business. You don't operate the tenant. We are a business. We deal with entertainment, classes, dealing with we are operating a business, and it's a lot more than just managing a piece of property. And they agreed, and they understood that, and that's why they're willing to pay us more than they would if they just hired a management. So, yeah. So that's the story. All right, look. One is the definition of operating expenses. Currently, somebody's got to take a look at that because that's what you currently have. It also authorizes your committee to make all the decisions on those operating expenses. So one goes with the other. If the operating expenses are paid by somebody else, they're going to make the decision. So that's something you've got to decide. Number three, and number three that I think we have to look at. I assume if it goes back to what the old lease was, which was the recreation lease before it was modified by the Millennium Agreement, and then the only issue is what is the gross rental. That's that's the deal that was on the table in 1999, and this that was a gross lease. When it became a net lease, the authority and the decision making was put in your hands, ladies and gentlemen, on what was spent and why it was spent. So you've got to decide. That's an issue. Now, if the answer is which is the best for us economically, and you're going to make your decision based on that, just think about it from the standpoint of it takes you off the hook. If the residents don't want something and you say, well, we don't have any authority anymore, sorry. I mean, that takes the committee off the hook. No more arguments about, well, this is a capital expense, this isn't, blah, blah, blah. They'd have to come to us.
Just
But
one
that would
point.
also remove this committee, the operating committee, from being the decider, which is okay, that's a decision you can
It's
make.
a classic rental model. You pay the landlord takes care of the property. We will shortly be sitting down, as we have every year, going line by line through the budget. That's what's being discussed here, the operating costs, right?
All costs associated with the operation of the facilities. I don't have the exact wording, but it's in here. You can look it up. It's which paragraph it is. And it's a very broad, and it was intended to be a very broad thing. It was actually based on what BOCA was, and what Deerfield was at that time. Ruth?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, wait a second.
She had her
I'm
hand up.
thinking back 20 years ago, when we were before this position, the residents wanted to be in charge of everything. They didn't like the lease we had then. We want to be in charge of what happens. Well, you've done it, and now you're unhappy with what you've done. If you go back to what we had, management will make decisions, they will make repairs, you will do nothing, and you will pay accordingly. What you have now is what you over here, the millennium, and it tells you what you're responsible for. Go back to gross, no more committee, no more thinking, no more anything. They will make decisions, they will do repairs, and we're back to 20 years ago when people didn't want that. Now make up your mind.
Cycles. Barbara?
About the length of the agreement, I heard that you had made agreements with Boca of 15 years, is that correct? No?
The Boca is a very different situation. First of all, the Boca actually was a 1980. This was the first one.
Right.
You know, Deerfield was the second one, and actually their lease expired in 2019. So now the residents, it's been conveyed to the residents. For whatever reason, originally done, and believe me, don't blame me, I was only 13 at the time. This was a 99-year lease, and it doesn't have a provision for conveyance to the residents even at the end of 99 years. That was the deal that was sold. I mean, that's what it is. I will not be here when the 99 years in 2068, and I'm not going to worry about that today. Boca was a 50-year lease, which was because of the changing 50, not 50-year lease, and it's at the end of the 50 years from when the last association was formed. The lease gets conveyed to an association that's controlled and owned by the resident. And that's 2000. I'm trying to remember what year. 2028.
I think so. Yeah.
But there's a runoff on until 2032.
Right.
Right.
But if we wanted to make, let's say, a 5-year lease, because we're totally different than the other places, we would have to see if they would be in agreement to that, wouldn't we?
Well, remember,
That would have to be put on the table.
it's just a 5-year agreement. The lease is in place until the year 2068.
Right.
Right.
In case sometimes we keep saying these things and no one is really aware. If you look in your documents,
It's there.
the original documents, you will find the long-term lease. I'm sure 99% of the people in this village have never read it. It's interesting. What we're talking about is an amendment to that long-term lease. It's well worth reading, just for the background. Donald.
Steve, I have a question that came up this past week. I'm not sure if it's pertinent to what we're talking about now. In my documents for you, there's language for dissolution of condominium. There's language for dissolution of condominium. What happens if a condominium ceases to exist? They no longer can meet their obligations. They don't have a board. The way I read it, it goes back to the land goes back to the original developer. My question is, if that's the case, if the condominium fails, if there's a catastrophic event, if the place becomes too decrepit to live in, what happens to that property? Is it going to benefit, or is it going to your organization? Is it going to you?
I really have no answer. I don't know the answer to that question. That's never even come. I've never even heard of that before. So I'll take a look. We'll take a look. I doubt the original developer was Century Village Inc.
Yes.
And Century Village Inc. was merged into at one point into a real estate investment trust. The real estate investment trust was sold to Centro, which went into bankruptcy. So, I don't know. It wouldn't be us. Let me put it that way.
So that's not even.
What we say, the key element no matter which way we think we're gonna go, in my opinion, is the landlord wants to make X dollars. So that's the basis. It would be good for us to know what the basis is, which would help us
That's the first thing that David asked, right?
to make the decision, because to me, maybe the triple net lease is the best way to go.
Let me
Because when
just
you
say,
have to interpret all this stuff, the bottom line is the landlord's gonna get X dollars. That's the whole situation.
Well-
If he pays for this or you pay for that, triple net leases are, they're very common. And
I'm building buildings right now in Pembroke that are medical buildings outside the gate. We have one tenant, it's a clinic, and they are responsible, the lease agreement we've entered into, we are responsible for the exterior and anything up to where it hooks into the building. Anything inside the building is their responsibility and to spend. That's how we constructed our lease. That's not what it says here, but that's a normal landlord-tenant relationship. If I maintain insurance, there's a casualty, the roof blows off, I've got to repair that. The HVAC goes out, they've got to repair it. It's because that's inside the building, or whatever it is. The linoleum needs to be replaced, and so the elevator, whatever it might be. That's a normal landlord. That's not a triple net lease. That's just a standard kind of lease agreement.
That's a good news.
So my homework is I need to have a discussion with the Benensons, express to them all the thoughts that were provided to me here. I would suggest that you want a longer-term lease than a longer-term agreement than a shorter-term agreement for one reason and one reason only. You don't want to have to go through this again in a couple of years or 3 years or 4 years. I don't, maybe you don't. But obviously that's not going to kill the deal. It's the money that will kill the deal.
10 years reasonable?
10 years.
10 years, I agree.
We have to get the
And part
numbers
of it
before we
is-
can
We
make
need
any
the numbers,
decision.
absolutely right.
Or we could have an option, a 10-year or a 20-year.
You can complicate it.
No,
That's not a bad
It's a
suggestion.
thought.
Yeah.
The longer down the
Basically-
road,
As long as there's a criteria
that's what I'm
to
saying.
extend, that the parties may choose to, either party may choose to extend upon the agreed terms. That's always the rule.
That's a standard thing.
Yeah. Like options.
Right.
Like I have a 15-year lease with my tenant, but he has options, or they have options, not he, they have options to have 2 5-year extensions.
You kind of touched on it as to why they were glad to delegate the authority. They don't understand this business. They don't understand
That's
what
what
goes on
Monica
down
was trying to say.
And sure, if they want to sit back, but I want to avoid an attitude from them which in essence is squeeze them till they squeak. And we got to be careful about that, right?
Right.
A decision, I think, should be made closer to home.
Well, I'm going to advocate for a deal at some point. And they're going to say, we want more or not, I want a deal, I want to accomplish a deal without having to go to the arbitration. It certainly would be a lot easier on all of us.
This might not be something you can share, but what is their actual investment in this place? What is their investment? What is Benenson's investment in Century Village, West Palm Beach?
But we have that. What were the original notes? I could look it up. I can tell you. I forget what the
Because they
price
still
is.
have a mortgage
$20 or
on
$30
the
million
property.
or something like that.
Oh, okay.
They bought it with paper. They bought it with a mortgage.
Yeah.
Non-prepayable, 13% mortgage that
Right.
lasted until 2005, and then they refunded.
I think it would help us if you would send us a copy of your boilerplate triple net. I think it would help us if you sent a copy of your boiler triple net lease that you just described, that you just rented a commercial building from. And that would give us a better idea, you know, everybody's sitting around, to discuss what
Isn't that what
really
this is, Ed?
What?
Isn't that what this is?
Yeah.
Here's the definition of operating expenses
Well,
that Mark was
You
looking
could-
for.
let her, yeah, this is, I was looking for.
The definition of operating
Speak up,
expenses
Mark.
is each, every, and all costs, whether direct or indirect, of the operation, maintenance, refurbishment, replacement, repair, and supervision of the CB West Palm Beach facility and all personalty fixtures and equipment therein, including without limitation insurance deductibles, ad valorem real estate taxes, sales tax, if any, on rents paid under the long-term leases.
So that's your boilerplate language of a triple net lease. The one I was talking about is not a triple net lease, because we have responsibility for the,
I realize that, it sounded pretty good to me.
well, but the rental structure is
Different.
is,
It all comes down
you
to
know,
dollars.
Right.
Also, you're forgetting, you have a brand new structure versus something that was built 50 years ago.
Right.
Codes are different, the materials are different. We have black pipe in this building that's no longer used. We have a lot of things that have deteriorated over the years. And that needs to be taken into consideration on both sides.
That's
Structure.
That's well. So why don't we shoot for a time to reconvene? Where I should come to you. You should come to me with your philosophy, subject to the numbers being subject to, and I'll come to you with a proposed economic proposal that hopefully that we will have approval for from the ultimate beneficiary of whatever the rent is, which is the Benenson Capital Corp. I think they should. I'll tell them about their wish to have capital expenses, and they'll say, sure, we'll build it into the rent. So you know they're going to do that. So the question is, I should come with something, and you should know at least have somewhere to start.
That's the starting point.
And of course they're going to highball it, because they're very, very sharp people. They're not dumb.
Dr. Monica, I forget what, over the 40 years from 1980 to 2020, what was the increase in rents?
It was $65.50.
$65.50?
We're pretty close, Doc.
Huh?
You're within 50
Yeah,
cents
you
of
were
being
within
right.
50 cents.
But remember,
Yes,
in
yes.
2000, it switched from gross to net, so it became a different. So if you add the operating rent that's currently being charged, and I don't know what that number is, it's the actual increase is substantially more.
Right.
So
I
what
looked at a CPI index. and
what's the
from-
current operating rent? Do you know?
I don't have it with me.
That's okay. I mean, but I know it's got to be at least $40 or $50, right? A year.
Yes, it's around just shy of 50, I think.
Okay, so it went up not only from the original, not only $65, it went up another 50, because that now incorporates operating rent. So it's actually $115 or
That
thereabouts.
would be an average of, say, about $3 a year increase from 1980. Just if Benenson comes in with a number that is way over that average, we can argue maybe.
Well, at least we have a course of dealing.
We have a number. They say we're going to increase it by $6. That's double the 40-year average.
Yeah.
I looked at the CPI index from January 2000, which was the beginning of the Millennium Agreement, to what the CPI index is for July 2020.
2020.
And took the difference, and then an average over that period was 2.65% increase in the base rent. You know, most of the contracts we have, they ask for an annual 3% increase. That was the average increase in the base rent.
So we
Over
did
the
increase,
period.
we increased by 2.65%?
That was the average.
That was the average.
Mhm.
And it's been about,
2000 to now.
and what has the, we can, any economist, any accountant, your accountant, sir, you can go and look up the CPI for what it's been since 2000 till now and see whether we're high, low, or on the same page. You know, that's something that I think that number would also be a helpful number that I will have on a sheet of paper as to what it's been for the national CPI, cost of living increases. We know it's 2.65 is what it actually has gone up
That's
since
the
2000.
average over 20
Yeah,
years.
I mean, year by year, it's been
Mhm.
higher or lower. but,
Right.
Like in 2010, it went up here.
That's the average CPI.
Yes.
No, that's the
That's
average
the
increase
average
in the base rent.
increase in the base rent.
It's gone up 2.65% per year through 2020. It's a lot. Okay. So when do we, it's now September 4th. For those of us who are Jewish, we're probably going to be a little bit out of whack with holidays and so forth and so on, maybe not. Should we shoot for something by the end of September to have another meeting?
Sounds good, yeah.
Is that okay with everybody?
So you guys know if we're unable to reach an agreement by the end of May, that's when this binding arbitration clause in the agreement would kick in, and May.
May of next year.
I read that.
May of next year, UCO would pick an arbitrator, we would pick an arbitrator, and then those two arbitrators would jointly select a third arbitrator. So it would be out of all of our hands at that point if we're unable to reach an agreement by May.
Does everybody understand what the costs would be
I just gonna,
going that route?
if it did go to arbitration, how's the cost split, 50/50?
There's a,
UCO
it's
would
in
bear their own cost and we would bear our cost.
I don't know for sure that that's what
I
it
don't
is,
think
but
it says that in here.
You don't think so?
Take a look at it.
Okay.
I'd have to take a look at what it says.
I'm just saying that's a consideration.
Maybe the arbitrators get to dispute resolutions.
Consider who pays.
I
Easy
said,
to
is
say
it
you
split
go
or who
pays.
pays?
People who live here pay.
That's true, but I'm saying there's a total cost,
Ah,
total cost of arbitration. We would hope to avoid it.
We'll look at the calendar, but I don't think we'll have any trouble making an adjustment.
David,
Yeah.
since Mark brought up about getting a date, and we have a calendar already, at the end of the month, I don't know when Rosh Hashanah is on 28th, I believe.
No, I think
19th.
Rosh Hashanah is the 18th,
Oh,
and
18th.
28th is,
Right, so
so
what about-
we go in October.
So what about the 30th of September? It's a Wednesday, no meetings scheduled.
Why don't you do it on a Friday?
Friday was good.
Friday the
I don't care. 25th,
Everybody can
Friday.
get here on a Friday.
25th?
Everybody can get here on a Friday.
That's fine.
Friday, the 25th at
Friday
10 o'clock.
morning.
Okay.
Good. Bob?
Here it is.
No
At
executive,
the-
We're canceling executive board.
no executive?
There is none.
If we're canceling executive board, then yes. If not,
Right.
then I would suggest doing it.
You can do it any day after 12.
Now they switched it to Friday morning.
All the meetings in the morning.
The arbitration provision here states that each party bears its own costs. However, the arbitrators may, at the discretion, may award fees and costs of the arbitration to the prevailing party as part of the cost.
That's what I read.
Well, they may not be prevailing party, do you agree?
Well, if let's say a proposal is sent by us, meaning us on behalf of, and it's in writing, and a counter proposal, and that's where, then whichever way it comes down, they can decide who's the prevailing party, where, you know. So, but chances are it would be each party would bear their own costs and fees and expenses. No. Actually, arbitration is people used to say it's cheaper than court. Well, I'll tell you what, you're paying arbitrators. Judges are paid by the taxpayer. And you're paying them hourly, and they can decide what is admissible, what isn't, whatever. It's not the rules of evidence under the law. So it's a little bit like kangaroo court. You get what you get. I mean, I don't love arbitration.
Is
But
it binding?
it's binding arbitration.
Are we agreed on the
I
25th?
use my
Yeah.
uncle.
Is there a
September
problem?
20. I haven't looked at my calendar and I forgot my phone in the car, so I will let you guys know. It's 10 minutes after leaving you, whether it's a
What did you say?
Temporary.
Friday.
Friday.
look. I think it was a good start. At least we got everybody's ideas and thoughts.
Just in case of the executive board, I would suggest the meeting be at either noon or 1 o'clock.
Well, obviously, if we're gonna meet here at 10, we're either gonna cancel the executive board. Depends if there's anything to be voted on. If there's nothing to be voted on, we might as well
I
cancel.
think it would be very, very hopeful to expect an agreement to be voted on would be on this. You're talking about other things.
Yeah. No, we're nowhere.
Okay. All right.
So 10 o'clock?
10 o'clock.
Without going to the second.
Anything else?
Question?
Questions?
It was, unfortunately, we have to go through this process, but at least it's good to see everybody well and healthy and stay safe and stay healthy.
I would be very interested in exploring Bob's question. What is the true horror of it reverting to the original model?
I think you're gonna be shocked.
Well, that's what we need to know. Yes,
We'll go back to what we felt, not we, the associations. They wanted control, so they
yeah,
got
I
it.
recall that.
So they got it.
The Israeli army major wanted control, and I read all that, and I said, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah, but David, if you read that original one, right, you're gonna find out that you're gonna pay and you're gonna have no say. Period.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you, everybody.
It often comes
Thank you,
down to
Mark.
dollars.
We got the same
Yeah.
situation.
Bob, can we make sure?
All right,
we
thank
get
you
a
all.